Welcome to Sincerely Me, a podcast about self-discovery and inner work so you can cultivate a deeper relationship with yourself and show up more fully in your work and life. My name is Tallia and I'm honored to be your host. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sincerely Me. It's Tallia here, and I'm so excited to have Miss Lena Franklin joining us to talk about all things inner work, self-discovery, mindfulness, meditation. The list can be a long one, but we have connected to really think about how we can best serve you through a conversation together. And the topic that Lena and I will be exploring together on the episode today is finding strength in suffering. And before I jump into it, I do want to give you a moment, Lena, to quickly introduce yourself, and we will get going with our wonderful list of questions and topics.
Awesome. Tallia, thank you so much for having me on. It's such a joy to connect with you in this work, and I love what you're putting out into the world. So much gratitude for that. Yeah, I'm a mindfulness-based psychotherapist and meditation teacher. I teach retreats and workshops, and I see clients individually. And my life's work is really at the intersection of inner healing through the art of presence. So teaching presence in a really applicable, palatable way through those ancient modalities, but using presence and mindfulness in the West in a way that really helps us to heal ourselves from the inside out.
And can you explain what you mean by presence?
Sure. So presence is another word for mindfulness. And in the West, we're seeing mindfulness elevate to a more visible level, which is really exciting. And I think much of that is due to the neuroscience that's coming out around meditation and mindfulness. It's no longer a woo-woo topic, but an actual tangible skill we can use to come into the present moment. So to answer your question, Tallia, presence is the intentional act of being in this moment on purpose and without judgment.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I agree totally that we're thankfully getting to a place where people are talking about these things more openly. And it just makes me so happy to not only see these conversations happening, but to be able to learn it and apply it in a way that feels realistic and doable for me. I know a lot of times when we think about going inward and doing the healing work and the inner work, we don't know where to start, right? So I think what I love so much about the work you do and the work I've seen you do through your retreats and through social media and everything I've seen from you is how easy and relatable and accessible you're making all of this work for people. So on behalf of everyone, I do want to just say thank you for the work you're doing and for how easily you're bringing this into day-to-day life for people.
Thank you so much. I don't know if this next comment will make sense, but it feels like, one, it's not about me, but it's also what I'm being called to do. So it's not as if I have a choice, really. It's been my calling, I think my whole life, in this lifetime at least. And more recently, I've been really thinking about how can we debunk some of these myths around meditation and mindfulness so it can be accessed by anyone, because it really is our true state of being. We just perpetually forget.
Yeah.
The challenge.
Totally. Yeah. In the speed of life, we forget what we're here to do.
Right.
And where we came from. And I wanted to share this quote from your website with everyone who's listening. The quote that you share is that the journey inward is our highest calling. That just struck me. And I want to kind of just explore what that means, both the journey inward piece, but also the highest calling and what it looks like to take that journey inward.
Great question. The journey inward, well, that insight first came to me through my own healing journey. And that's really where our path of insight and self-discovery begins. And to journey inward really is our highest calling, because that is our responsibility, truly, as human beings, to understand ourselves, to begin to honor all of those inner pieces of who we are, whether that's a wounded child piece or our inner warrior, all of that darkness and light that we all possess as humans is right here. And when we can begin to honor every single part, even if it's a piece that we're not so proud of, we can begin to truly shift the energy, the consciousness, the state of our world, which sounds really big, and it is, but it begins with that willingness and the courage to turn inward, because we're really programmed, especially in the West, to look outside of ourselves for success, for fast-paced living, for validation. So for me, that journey inward has been the most powerful adventure, because it has been an adventure I've ever embarked on. So I don't know if I answered your question fully, but that's kind of what came up, Tallia, as you shared the quote. I can't even remember when that quote came up. I think when I was teaching one time, it just kind of channeled through me, but it's true. There's a tremendous amount of truth to it.
Absolutely. And I love what you mentioned right there with your response around how there's dark and there's light, and how the journey inward for a lot of us is scary, because there's almost this like inner knowing that we are going to have to confront some of that darkness.
Yes.
But how that's, that's the whole point, right? Like it's about having, it's about moving through that fear and having the courage to show up fully and to be able to, confront the darkness, but also see that there's light in that journey and in the process itself as well.
Right. Absolutely. Most of the, whether we want to call them spiritual teachers, mindfulness teachers, talk about that existence of light and darkness, and that the light of our essence, the core of who we are, that power and sense of purpose, can only exist at its greatest potential if we're courageous enough to also move through the darkness, our traumas, our fears, our insecurities. So I love the way you put that.
Absolutely. And that is the topic of today's podcast, right? Is how even in moments of suffering, we can find strength. So in the darkness, where is the light when we're looking for it? And so I do want to get a little bit of your story in this, in terms of what your path has looked like and how it's gotten you to where you are in terms of moving through that darkness and doing the work you're now doing.
Sure. So I grew up outside of DC, and I grew up in a Buddhist Christian home, to give you the spiritual background. My mom is from Vietnam, and she was a practicing Buddhist woman. And my dad is a Presbyterian psychologist from Marietta, Georgia. And it was a really fascinating way to grow up. One weekend I would go to church with my dad, and the next weekend I may go to temple with my mother. And I grew up going to Vietnam to visit her family. And they live about 2 hours south of Saigon. So there was this rich spiritual, cultural ground that I was able to connect with initially. And it's funny because I have these memories of my mom. We may be sitting in front of the TV in the evening, and perhaps we were watching the news. And of course, the news is just ridden with fear and catastrophic events and war. And so she would witness that, and then she would say, "That's enough." She would make us sit at our family's altar, which had incense and pictures of our ancestors and bells and all sorts of spiritual items and paraphernalia. And she would say that we are humans with this power to tap into compassion. And that's what we can do when we feel helpless and hopeless. as the chaotic world swirls around us. So at the time, of course, I thought it was absolutely ridiculous that my mom would make me sit in silence and stillness and pray and meditate. But they were really seeds that were planted within me that helped to guide me later on when I did face a tremendous amount of darkness and suffering. And the biggest trauma I've experienced in my life was that my mom suddenly passed when I was in my first year of grad school. So I was in grad school to become a licensed clinical social worker at the University of Georgia. And during that first year, my mom suddenly died of a stroke, and it totally turned my world upside down. I was in that existential place of, what does this mean? And if life is truly that fleeting, why are we here? And so there was this sense of urgency that emerged from within me to sit with these very real but painful questions and emotions. And it's beautiful in hindsight, but at that time when I was in my grief process, I was in therapy and I was going through that process, but realized there were constrictions to the traditional talk therapy process, that just talking through the sadness and the grief and the darkness would only get me so far. So I came back to some of the meditations and spiritual practices that she taught me when I was younger. And through that and through finding yoga and coming onto my mat, I realized there's so much power beyond even what the rational mind can understand when we meet ourselves on the cushion and we're courageous enough and willing to sit with that grief without needing it to be different, without needing to push it away, that there was something birthing within that grief, a light, a sense of purpose and deeper connection to what it means to be a soul in human skin in this lifetime. And so that was the catalyst for my spiritual awakening.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lena. I think where I want to dig into that a little bit is, for most people, and I'll maybe just speak for myself, I don't want to speak for others, but when we find ourselves in those deep, dark emotions, whether it is grief or loss or just whatever the pain is, to be able to be curious about the emotion instead of attaching ourselves to it, instead of defining ourselves by it, and instead of giving the emotion power, like what is a tool that we can use to be able to approach it in a way that doesn't consume us, but that actually allows us to open up to a different part of ourselves. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. Because we're really programmed to avoid and push away pain and to cling to pleasure. Mm-hmm. So that's just our evolutionary psychology, wiring, and functioning. So a really easy but powerful tool we can use is this kind of mental tool I call the 3 A's. And it's very simple. The first A is to acknowledge the pain or the discomfort that's coming up, whether that's a thought or a feeling. We just acknowledge it. The second A is to accept that this is a part of our humanness without judgment. We accept that this feeling is here, it's present, it's part of our human experience. And then the third, which is probably the most important, is to take an alternative action. So instead of, grabbing that third glass of wine or that piece of cake or whatever it is that we use to numb the discomfort, perhaps we sit for 5 minutes and ask ourselves, where is it in our body? We do some mindful belly breathing. But whatever that alternative action is, it needs to be in service of honoring and being present to the discomfort and the uncomfortable emotion or thought.
I love that. Okay, so it's acknowledge, accept, and alternative action.
Yes.
Okay. That last piece of taking alternative action, I think, to your point, we because we're conditioned to only want to feel good things, we tend to not even recognize the actions we take. Like, we're so in this autopilot sense of functioning or way of functioning that we don't take the time to pause and ask ourselves, what could I be doing instead that could maybe lead to a different outcome? Because an assumption we can make is that the actions you are taking when you're sitting in those moments of pain without pausing are probably not actually helping in any way. Or maybe there's an immediate or short-term sense of relief, but ultimately you're not getting the information you need to be getting or could be getting that's resting within the darkness of the pain.
Absolutely. Yeah, you said it beautifully. It's our willingness to be with it. And actually, the discomfort is good. So if we can begin to reprogram our minds to really embrace, okay, this is uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. I'm feeling like I want to jump out of my skin or whatever. That very discomfort will birth growth and healing and change.
I'm curious to know too, how do you approach yourself in those moments with compassion? Because so much of this is, from what we're saying, is that we tend to meet ourselves with judgment and with, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I should be better by now, or, whatever other judgments come into it. How do we instead come at it with that sense of compassion, and if not that, then at least gratitude for what's happened, even if it was extremely painful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is where catching ourselves in the moment is so key. If we notice ourselves judging our feeling or even judging our reaction, it's awareness is first, right? We acknowledge, we become aware. And in terms of a tangible way that I work with uncomfortable emotions every day, because I'm human and I feel them every day, is to pause, stop whatever I'm doing, doesn't matter what it is, and to shift into the heart. So bringing your attention into the heart space, the heart area, the chest. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I'll put my hands there and I'll breathe into that area. And I just say, may I host this? Mm-hmm. May I host this, whatever this is, the emotion, the thought, the experience, because I know that this is coming up for a reason. And it's the pausing and the going in, even if just for 30 seconds, that can really help and shift.
Yeah, that to me sounds like, how do we hold space for this in a way that is going to ultimately serve me well?
Yes, that's right.
I love that. So shifting into your heart space, holding on to it, observing it, being curious about it, mm-hmm. not attaching to it.
Right. And what's really great is if we understand that every emotion is impermanent, it'll come, it'll go. It's like a storm. It's like the wind, that it will subside.
Yeah, that piece of it too, the time and how the assumption almost is that, and we know it's not true, but it feels so true in those moments that we'll never feel differently. That's the way we're going to feel for the rest of forever.
That's right.
Come back to that, and as a reminder of the fleetingness of time and emotion, and that this is not who I am. This is just an experience I'm having, and it's an emotion I'm feeling. And what is this, again, ultimately trying to share or tell me or show me?
Absolutely. I love that. In the moment, we inevitably feel like it's never going to end. So I like to say that, because if people understand that, they'll be like, okay, yes, I can connect with that. But when we shift into that heart space and realize it is in service of learning and evolution, we can ask ourselves, what is the lesson?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the exercises I use a lot with my clients, and it's typically around fear more directly, but it can really be used around any emotion, is to talk to that emotion as if it were a person.
I love that.
And, the theme of the podcast is Sincerely Me, which is all about getting to know yourself and writing letters to yourself. And so if it resonates with any of you who are listening, try to talk to whatever it is you're feeling. Write a letter to it. If it's anger, dear anger, I realize you're showing up for me and I want to know why. Here's how you're showing up. Here's where it's sitting in my body. Here's where it started for me. Whatever the questions are you want to ask it, have a conversation with it, because it not only helps you acknowledge what you're feeling and, to your point, Lena, accept it, but it also helps you, again, come at it with curiosity and be able to realize that it's something that's outside of you, not a part of who you are or will always be.
Right. I love that. Your anger, your sadness, all of those uncomfortable emotions, in addition to the positive ones, but especially the ones that need some care, they want our loving, our compassionate attention.
Oh, I love that. They want our attention.
Yes.
And we don't pay enough attention.
And we don't. We just push them away.
Yeah.
I like to say, and I say this to my clients and students often, treat every emotion like a friendly visitor walking through the door of your consciousness.
There's actually a quote or a poem by Rumi. You probably know it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
I think it's called The Guest House. I'll have to find it and share it in a little bit, but it's all about, just welcoming these things, good or bad, and seeing what they're here to do, and realize that they're all guests that have been invited, right? By something bigger than you, by the universe, whatever it is that you believe or want to think. And how can you just more compassionately open the door without resistance and just see what happens, see what comes up.
Right.
Yeah.
The lessons will emerge. We just need to be awake to them.
Yeah. And present enough to, again, pay attention. And that's where, mindfulness and the practice of meditation, I think, comes into the picture, obviously. So can you share a little bit more about in those moments of, because I think to your point too, it's easy to look at these moments and experiences of suffering, years down the road and say, yeah, there was definitely a lesson there. Yeah, it definitely, I see the light now. But how can you in those moments bring present moment awareness in a way that catches you before you fall?
Right. The first is to understand that whatever we resist persists. So whatever we're resisting is just going to come up in a more painful or maladaptive way in the future. So there's that. What I would say to people is create your own mission statement around why you feel that it's important to practice presence and to be with these uncomfortable emotions. So, we can read and we can listen and all of these things, but why is it important to you to heal and evolve and continue to expand as a human being? And the answer to that question, why, will help to fuel your willingness and courage to be present in the moments that we need it most, what we call the dark night of the soul moments, when we're crying on our bathroom floor and feeling like the world is ending, because none of us are exempt from those moments. So understanding whatever we resist persists, and then going into your why. And we don't often ask ourselves that.
Yeah.
Even as a mindfulness teacher and spiritual teacher, I really kind of came into that question more deeply a few years ago. I'm like, okay, well, what is it? What is the mission statement for me? Because it's going to be different for me than it is for others. And to come back to it. And then we come back to it, we write it down, we journal about it, we come back to it over and over and over. And that why will shift over time as we evolve.
And this reminds me of something that you talk a lot about, and we briefly talked about before hopping on to record this episode, is that we can all heal ourselves. We can all be our own mindful healers, to use your words, Lena. And I think it's easy, at least for me, to look to everyone else for a quick fix or for the answers or to heal, right? I have kind of my team and my troop of people who I go to, whether it's for energy healing or therapy or what have you. But at the end of the day, we also have that power within ourselves to be our own healers. And I would just love for you to share a little bit more about, how we can, not necessarily how to tap into that, but how to realize that capacity within ourselves.
Yeah, that is the truth of our power. And authentic power is when we tune into our inner abilities and we align our life with our purpose or our soul, whatever we want to call it. But in order to embrace and realize our capacity to be our own mindful healer, we have to honor the moment to moment shifts that we make that are seemingly small, but actually incredibly profound. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. So I have been very intentional about, who I'm allowing around me and what tribe I'm interacting with, because the more I do this work, the more sensitive I become, and different energies resonate, and then more toxic energies or ones that have been damaging in the past don't. And it's okay. It's actually important for us to intentionally create our tribe. So in moments of putting up boundaries with family members, with friends around how much time and energy I'm going to put towards our relationship, I, in the past, would make choices in service of what they wanted from me. Okay, I want you here. I need you to call me right now. I would, because of that old pattern of conditioning. Take care of your sister. You're the caregiver. You're the patient one. So you need to respond right away. Mm-hmm. And as I became more conscious of that, I began to shift and say internally to myself, what is it that I need in this moment? So even in that shift, that self-inquiry, that pause between the request and my action, whether it's with friends, family, beyond, that is embracing your ability to be your own mindful healer, to be your own inner guru. Mm. So it doesn't even have to be a practice. It can be just a moment of awareness.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm having a million light bulb moments right now. Like, this is so what I need to hear right now, Lena. It sounds like in that example, becoming your own mindful healer, just to kind of recap what you just said, is to turn inward, to ask yourself in the moment before taking action, is this authentic? Is this coming from a place of truth for me? And what is it that would be true instead, if not this?
Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's it. It's that coming home to yourself and sitting with what feels true, what feels real, what feels authentic, rather than continuing in that pattern, that rhythm of our conditioned actions and beliefs.
This might potentially be a strange question to ask, but how do you know when something is true for you?
Is a great question. And so there's a couple, I would say, layers to the answer. The first is tap into two of your most potent, powerful, intuitive centers. So the heart mind is what I call it. So when you're assessing if it feels real and true, you may put your left hand or your right hand or both over your heart. And then you also want to breathe into your belly. So our gut brain actually creates, more serotonin than our actual brain. So there's an incredible amount of wisdom and intuition in the torso area of the body. And I will literally, if I'm asking myself a question, and an example maybe to say yes or no to this social engagement, right? I will tap in, put my hand or hands over my heart, breathe into the belly, and ask, what does my soul need? And the answer arises. The body sensations don't lie. If there's constriction in the heart, if there's kind of tightness in the diaphragm or the belly, it's like, no, that doesn't feel in alignment. That's a no. Mm-hmm. If there's openness, if there's a sense of longing to connect with that person, if there's softening in the heart space, then that's typically a yes. Let me say yes to this opportunity.
Wow. That, I'm like, yeah, my stomach feels tight a lot of the time.
Me too.
There's a lot of constriction happening.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just it's such a powerful awareness because most of us do. We've been conditioned to say yes.
Yeah.
We've been conditioned to worry about what other people think when we say no.
Mm-hmm.
That fear of rejection, which is very primal because, our ancestors lived in tribes and belonging was a part of our survival. But we don't necessarily need that sense of survival anymore and that fight or flight response. So we can be incredibly wise and intentional. And when we honor what we need, the universe supports us and creates so much abundance in our life.
What that's bringing up for me too is that a lot of times I know what is true for me, but that's different from there's this distinction between knowing and living what's true. And that, I mean, I'm assuming that's also where so much pain comes from is when you know but aren't living, and the dissonance, the tension between what you know versus what you're putting out into the world, and how to, I guess, my work is how to bridge that gap between knowing and actually doing, and trying to ask myself, why is it that speaking my truth or doing what I know to be true is hard? Is it fear of judgment? That, is it that I'm worried that if I do this, then these things are going to happen, which are totally not based in truth most of the time. But I'm assuming that's where a lot of the work is for a lot of us is knowing, but also tying authentic action to what it is we know to be true.
That's right. So many of us do know, like you said, what our truth is or what feels in alignment, but it hasn't necessarily translated into action yet, or maybe with a particular situation or person or scenario. And that's okay. That's where we can't practice mindfulness and presence without the element of self-compassion because we are where we are. And this is exactly where we need to be in order to be anywhere else. So in that moment, we honor where we are. And if the action's not syncing up, we can just be curious, to use your word, which I love, that curiosity piece. We can be curious about what is that resistance? What is the dissonance? What is the barrier? And to begin to lovingly dialogue with that.
Yeah. Self-compassion. That's a whole other topic we should explore at some point.
Yes, that's a whole other hour or more.
It is. What I do want to share, Lena, if I may, is a response you shared with me when we talked about you coming onto the podcast. One of the questions that I'm asking all of my guests is, what does it mean, in your own words, in your opinion, to live a life of significance? And I'd love to share a little bit of what you wrote and then maybe dig a little bit more into it too. But what you shared with me was that living a life of significance means living in alignment with your truth. When our words and actions are living in alignment with our heart's deepest intention, life becomes a playground overflowing with meaning.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
Playground overflowing with meaning. That just, I think why I love that the ending to it is because that like childlike playfulness and just joy. Nothing else matters. I think when I think about when I've been the most present, it's when I'm a kid. Like that's on the playground, right? Like we're so in the moment. We're not occupied by thoughts of the future, by, regrets or doubts from the past. And the thought of being able to live in that way with that childlike, again, playfulness and curiosity is so desirable. So desirable.
It is so powerful, and it's really who we are. We've just been tamped down and constricted by life. So if we're on the path of self-discovery, of personal growth, we're constantly unlearning our way back to that childlike joy, which can bring the most powerful and meaningful presence.
Yeah.
It's actually one of my main intentions. So every year I align with different intentions, and the two that I'm working with a lot this year as the journey continues is freedom, but also play, the sense of play. Where can we find play? in our life rather than, automatically going into the heaviness and the adulting stress that we experience.
Yeah. Yeah. The heaviness that somehow ends up being a part of what we move with day to day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also love what you just said too, is that the journey is always continuing. We're never done. The work is never done.
Nope.
However deep you've gotten into it, something will always show up to continue exploring and to continue, kind of expanding into. And so I love that there's that awareness for you too, as an expert, as someone who supports others. It's work that always presents itself. The opportunity is always there for us to step into our truth, for us to turn inward, for us to honor whatever it is that's coming up for us in our life experience.
Right. Absolutely. The work is never done.
Yeah.
Which to me reveals the sense of limitlessness and expansion that we're diving into when we're on this path.
Mm-hmm.
At every moment, whether challenging or joyful, is there to help us evolve and to grow, and that we're perpetually in this state of unfolding.
One thing that I share with a lot of the folks I work with, and even for myself, is that the things that we feel like are happening to us, how can we reframe that mindset and just tell ourselves they're happening for us instead?
Yeah.
And how that just takes us from a place of resistance to a place of curiosity and gratitude, right? This is happening for me. Okay, well, what is in this? What gift is in this that I know looking back I will have felt immense gratitude for?
Exactly. That's it. That reframe, Tallia, is so vital.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me so much of one of the meditation Buddhist teachers that I sat with in a training. And his name's Hun Lai, Tibetan Buddhist master. And he was funny. He used a lot of humor, but he would say, when suffering or pain emerged in my life, I would say, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I have so much gratitude for that, because it's almost like it's coming up now for me to work with, and then can help me awaken. But then also it's like, all right, well, then that's done, and we go through this ebb and flow of challenge, and then there's maybe a little bit more ease and peace, and then challenge. But it's working for us, just like you said.
Well, and to your point, I think it's recognizing the cyclical nature of life, right? The ebb and flow, the seasons of ease and seasons of dis-ease or unease, and realizing that, again, it's temporary. There's always whatever's happening now is getting you closer to whatever is next, and being able to kind of take that step back and being able to observe the flow and the rhythms and the kind of bigger picture at play, I think can also help in when you're in the depths of it. Is it's as heavy and deep as you may be in the work, it's still coming back to that place of knowing that it's part of something bigger.
Right. Right. We are drops in time, a grain of sand.
Mm-hmm.
And that can help us to release any of the heaviness that we're carrying that isn't serving us. And to your point, we need to balance all of the challenge and heaviness of life with that sense of joy.
And it's also realizing too that, life isn't meant to be heavy and hard.
No.
I think we're so caught up in this narrative that, work is hard, and if I'm not suffering, then I'm not doing enough. And it's the badge of honor that comes with like, oh, I'm so stressed, I'm so tired, I'm doing so much, and how in some way it's celebrated. Mm-hmm. To feel that heaviness and to be carrying the weight of the world and to be doing everything for everyone else. And I think in some ways we kind of get this sense of pride maybe from it, but to realize that that's not our truth. That's not what we're made for or what we're made of at the end of the day.
No. Our bodies are literally made of the same elements as Earth and the stars in the cosmos, which can help remind us that we are not made to be attached to technology 24/7 or sit at office desks for 12 hours a day. That's not what we're programmed for.
Mm.
And we can ask ourselves, where in my life do I need more rest, more softness? And where have I been attaching my value to grinding and achieving and, being stressed out and perpetually busy?
Totally. Yeah. That's a good question to leave everybody with. Where can you bring more ease and light into your life? And maybe it is in the darkest moments. Maybe you're in a place of heaviness and it's coming at it with that compassion. Or maybe you're not in a super dark place, but just in kind of a hurried, rushed state of being. And so it's finding, to your point again, Lena, is finding space for rest.
Right. Because in that spaciousness, you'll come back to who you actually are. And that's the journey of awakening and self-discovery.
Coming back to yourself.
That's right. We're born ourselves and we'll spend our whole lives coming back to ourselves.
Yes. And that transitions us beautifully into this final question that I want to ask you, and that I'm excited to ask all of the guests who bring their wisdom and love into this podcast. And it's tied to, again, the title of this podcast, which is Sincerely Me. And I would love to know if you could write a letter to yourself at any point in time, what point in time would it be? Past, present, future. And what would you say to yourself?
So I would like to say to my past, present, and future self simultaneously, because all of those elements are existing simultaneously. Dear Lena, you are enough. Your heart, your capacities, your power is limitless. The work that flows through you is meant to be shared with the world. You are courageous beyond measure. And that's what I would say.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Lena.
Thank you, Tallia, so much for having me on and creating such a powerful platform for this work to be shared and talked about. Super grateful for you.
Thank you. And we invite any of you, if that letter resonates with you and you want to take a moment after listening to this episode to talk to yourself, past, present, future, what point in time would you go to and what would you say to yourself? See what comes up. And Lena, before I let you go, I'd love to get everyone who's listening a way to keep up with you and the wonderful work you're doing. So if there's anything you want to share with folks about how to keep in touch and keep up, please feel free to do that.
Sure. So you can keep in touch and connected with me on social media. My handle is at mindful_healer. And you can explore more about my work and my in-person offerings at lenafranklin.com. And it's LENA Franklin.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lena.
Thank you, Tallia.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that lovely conversation that I had with Miss Lena Franklin. Thank you for tuning in. And before you head out, one thing that we did not get a chance to share is an upcoming wellness retreat that Lena is leading in partnership with Pravasa in Sri Lanka, October 18th through the 27th. It's a 9-night and 10-day wellness vacation that will journey you back to balance through the art of mindfulness, energy work, and holistic healing practices. If you want to learn more about this retreat, check out the link in the show notes for all the details. And as always, I would love to hear from you all. Drop me a note, say hi. You can find me on Instagram at Tallia Deljoux and on my website at talliadeljoux.com. The giveaway for a free coaching session is also still open until the end of April. To be entered, all you have to do is subscribe, rate, review to the podcast, and shoot me a DM screenshotting the review. I'll choose a winner at the end of the month, and we'll get going on some inner work together. Thank you all again for tuning in. I hope you have a lovely and restful day. Sincerely, me.